One of the things decorative painters seem to have a problem with is floating color. I'd like to give you a few tips that I've learned over the years that have helped me, and hopefully they will help you as well. I'm going to work on an apple, and I purposely picked a round object to give you a couple extra little technique tips that we can work on. You always want to use the largest brush you can for the area in which you're working. For this size apple, I'm using a size 16 shader. I'm going to just wet my brush in my water. I'm coming to my paper towel and just gently laying it down. So I have quite a bit of water in here. I've already played with these colors once, but I'm going to again pick up some of the orange color and about a third or a quarter of the bristles. I'm going to, even though I've played on this before, this area is still a little damp, so I'm going to continue to blend on top of that damp paint and water. This helps to preserve that extra moisture, so I'm not wasting moisture by going all over my palette. I'm blending, blending, blending until I see a nice gradation of color from dark to middle to light to nothing. Now, since I have that extra water in my brush, it did bleed through a little bit. So this is my little tip. That extra water will help thin your paint and give you a nice smooth float. After I'm done blending, I pinch the water side of my brush, and I'm purposely using kind of a dirty paper towel because it's damp. And I very, very gently swipe my brush back and forth on a damp area of the paper towel. Since I'm working on a round area, rather than lay my brush down flat, I'm using a C-stroke. By C-stroke, I mean start on the chisel edge of the brush, press through, lift up onto the chisel edge of the brush. You'll get a nice, clean float that way. I'm just going to add a little bit more water to my brush. You've already seen that. Again, gently brush, blotting it out. Pick up a little more paint and blend again before I go on to my surface. Again, pinch the water side of the brush, very gently swipe on a damp part of the paper towel. So again, I'm using a C-stroke. I'm going to start on the chisel edge of the brush, press through, and lift up onto the chisel edge. I'm going to move that color toward my highlight, which I have already tapped in. So I'm walking that color over toward the highlight. Ideally, I would have this dry before I go on to do the next step, but I want to keep moving here, and hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm doing. Again, blending my paint, pinch the water side, swipe on the paper towel. I'm using a C-stroke again, coming onto the highlight side, and it is not as wide a float as the shadow side. The area where my stem is going to go, again, I'm using a stroke. I'm going to do it up here so you can more easily see rather than on the apple. Chisel edge, press through, lift up on the chisel edge. This is why I believe learning stroke work is so important. It helps you with all your painting. But that's a lesson for another day. I'm going to just clean my brush out in my water tub. Again, just barely laying it down on the paper towel. Picking up my next color. I like to layer my colors because I think it gives you more depth and you get a much smoother float. Again, I'm blending back and forth, back and forth, back and forth till I get the blend that I want. Remember, what you see on your palette is what you're going to see when you put your brush down. I have that extra water, so I'm pinching that side of my brush, very gently swiping on my damp paper towel. And I'm going to add a little bit more color. Again, using that C-stroke motion. This time I'm walking that color up, again toward the highlight, but not quite as far as I did the first color. And finishing up on the highlight side. Again, not as wide as before. You also need to add the color on here, but since this is all wet, I'm just going to let that go for right now. If I think, oh, I want my apple a little redder, I can, after this is dry, go back and do this step one more time. My final step on the apple is going to be the very shadow color, which is my antique maroon. Again, picking up the paint, blending it on my palette, And again, pinch that water side of the brush, gently swipe on the damp paper towel. Once again, I'm just barely touching, and I'm going to add that color just to the shadow side of my apple, moving it up just a tiny little bit. And this apple has all the steps completed. As you can see, I've kind of lost my highlight as I've gone through each step, so I'm just going to go back and put that in again. I love using these Low Cornell dome brushes. I use it dry. I'm going to start off with my base color and get that in my brush first. Then I'm going to pick up my first highlight color, take that excess out on my palette. I'm very gently going to start right in the center of where my highlight is, and I'm tapping that color in because that's where my brightest highlight should be. And as I come around, I am using a little bit less pressure and letting that blend into my red areas. I'm going to go back in then with my next highlight color, pick it up on the brush, take the excess out on my palette, again starting right in the very center, but I leave a halo of that first color showing around the second color. And then I'm going in with my very lightest color, again on the dirty brush, take out the excess, and that's what's going in the very center there for your very brightest highlight. You can also use this technique that I just showed you for the floating. I like to many times shadow around the entire design that I have done on my piece, which is what I've done here. You can also use this technique if you have a long area that you need to pull your brush. What I do, and I'm going to show you on this apple here just very quickly, is wet my brush, take again just the very excess out on my paper towel, and I'm going to dampen the entire area around the outside. I'm just going to go in with Antique Maroon because that's the color I have on my palette right now. Again, just picking it up in the brush, blending it out, doing my steps all over again, pinch the water side, swipe. I'm going to lay my brush down next to the apple, and you can see how that dampness, that water around the outside edge, helps to pull and soften that color, so I can add a little bit of a shadow all the way around. I hope these techniques help you with your painting. Thanks for watching.